Simon Tindall. I work for the Open University. I am currently the head of new business at the OU, and my background is predominantly within high tech and equally within space and design. So I've had various roles, most notably with people like Sun Microsystems for nearly 20 years, and then moved in to work for people like Steelcase, redesigning classrooms and libraries to accommodate how students now adapt and how students engage and those types of things. And then for the last 4 years, I moved from commercial over to academia, and my role is really currently focused on how does the OU become more relevant to the commercial world, how do we build incremental revenue streams, and in particular at the moment is focusing on, for want of a better phrase, that horizon scanning. So not necessarily focusing on where we are today, but where does the OU want to be in 3 to 5 years' time. Current priority is very much looking at future directions of the OU, and I think the three key areas that I focus on at the moment are, one is beyond apprenticeships. So we're all, apprenticeships are really becoming part of our core standard business. It's very much, we know there's a skills gap, we know there's a skills shortage. So how do we use the scale of the OU and the online provision of the OU to actually really try and do something, paradigm shift within actually skills provision. So I'm very focused on what we're doing around employability skills and core skills, and the aim being to establish a sort of default national or indeed international platform of core skills which are free to everyone. This fulfills part of the OU's social remit about education provision for all, but it also just attracts, there's an underlying business model where it attracts more people into the university. So that's one key area, is around skills. Tied into that is the focus on modularization of content. So increasingly people are looking to do smaller and smaller incremental parts of content and courses, necessarily doing large degrees over a number of years, but equally doing this movement towards doing smaller pieces almost on a consistent basis. So that old model of going to university for 3 or 4 years and then doing a career for 30 kind of goes out the window, and where we see that trend is increasingly that it's learning as a service. It's continual learning as you go through your career on numerous career differences. So we're very interested in that area, and how do we modulate, still keep the level of the education at degree level, but equally look towards doing content in more incremental parts that add up. So one of the things we do at the university is we do a model whereby you can study a number of quite different modules, and it's an open degree, and they add up, or they all get a number of credits. And I think we'll see a wider extension of that model where you are potentially studying in different institutions or in different countries and gaining recognized credit, which then add up or is given as credit for prior learning in other universities, and that whole model increasing. And then the third area sort of entwined into that is this whole area of localism. We're a global provider, we're a national provider, and then yet equally we know that whilst people learn online, they equally want a mentoring, a face-to-face mentor or something like that. Yeah, so this is actually our 50th anniversary year of the Open University. We set up back in 1969. So we see it as a bit of a step year, and I think one of the key things that we're looking at is how do we, one of the things I'm very interested in is how do we know and address that skills shortage. So rather than just do another program or something that's in that model, is how do we actually look a little bit bigger? And so we're very interested. We're working with some industry partners. We have a provision of courses that are coming out. They're badged, they're digitally certified, and so they have a currency. You don't just get the course for showing up. You actually have to work through the course. You have to take the tests. But equally, it allows anybody on a global basis can undertake these courses. They're sort of they all have a set structure of 24 hours of online learning. And they're in areas like leadership, they're in areas like networking. And what we see is that is what employers are saying, these are either the incremental skills or the core skills that they're really looking for, either beyond degree or in some cases even as a replacement for, or those are the more important skills that they're looking for. Okay, so this is a new program for us, so we're building out the courses. We will currently start out with 8 courses, and I think we have 5 of them out today, and we should have the others in the next couple of months. The biggest challenge, so already we've had something like about 100,000 people start these courses. We've awarded something like about 15,000 badges. Mm-hmm. But increasingly what we're looking to do is scale this. And so this isn't something that the OU can just push out. This is about establishing a platform and then saying to employers, here's an asset, here's a resource. This is an attempt, it's not perfect, but it's an attempt to then say, help us build increments to this. If you see that this course on networking, for example, addresses 90% of what you want, tell us what the other 10% is, and maybe we put an additional element to it. It's also about employers encouraging their employees, but I think it even goes beyond that. It's about employers saying, how do we use this to go out to other audiences as well? So how do we teach our supply chain? How do we potentially even go out to our customers? And I think, an employer in that traditional sense, or you look at, a Google or Amazon and say, well, you have the reach into these markets. And this is an asset, or it's something that's been built. It's free. It's always going to be free to the learner, but they need to be made aware of it. The challenge is not just putting the courses up. The challenge is actually then spreading the word and getting a buzz on it. But I really like the idea of badging because I think it's a great way that you can achieve something, but then showcase that and showcase it in a more engaging way. So you can put it on your LinkedIn profiles or your social media, Twitter feeds or whatever. So I like the badging concept, and I think badging, not just from the Open University, but badging generally, is a really nice way of tracking these sort of micro credentials and those types of things. Equally, I really like the way, one of the other things I like is the way that old teaching methods are starting to come back into online provision. So if you look at concepts like storytelling, which go back to early teaching or early sitting around the fire, if you like, the concept of how do you build a story and how do you build, rather than just present content, is how do you build scenarios where people become engaged and excited, and you almost dramatize the content such that, as that week's course ends, there's almost like the soap opera moment of encouraging people to sort of tune in next week, and here's the exciting answer to the question. I'm not an academic, but what always amazes me is how much thought goes into the building of content, and how this way of encouraging people and keeping them within or being excited and enchanced by education and by learning. So it's about analytics, and it's really looking, so most of our degree students, I think it's around about 70-80% of them today, we are tracking their full movement within the learning environment, and building onto that sort of social and economic data that we know about them or they have given us. And really then what we're trying to do is run that through predictive models, such that we're able to start predicting when a student is struggling, or you're seeing very early signs of that prediction, and so you can actually intervene, and so your tutor can connect with that student, either online or in person, and say, look, at the moment you're heading down this learning path which may not get to your learning objectives. This is the change of behaviour. The extension of that model is that you then start sort of explaining it, or rather than just seeing it as about retention, is you actually start saying, okay, so we're recognizing that you're studying X, but and you're going to end up with a 2-1, but if you want to get to a first on this module, these are the additional pieces of work that you should focus on, because this is the analytics are showing this is where you're at your weakest, or those types of things. So I think it's a really exciting area to automate that, and machine learning and those types of areas. But equally, the Open University is the nature of our market is that we are very much looking for, or 70-80% of people come into the university are coming in mid-career, and so the average age of our student is about 26, 27, and equally that means that their previous education experience may not have been particularly good. So our aim is, how do you encourage people into education, and the way that you're capturing that imagination or that intrigue, if you like, could be through a YouTube clip, or through a BBC programme or something like that we co-produce. And the shift is, how do you move them from informal learning to a more formal structure? So I think one of the key trends that we're seeing generally is around modularization, is how do people want to learn in very different ways. People want to learn in probably smaller increments and on a more ongoing sort of lifetime commitment. So the easiest way of looking at it is, how I always use it is, if you did an IT degree at any university, arguably by the time you've graduated after 3 or 4 years, some of what you've already learned is out of date. So the challenge is, and then 10 years down the line, how valid is that, the content of that degree? And so, I think what's interesting is, how do universities increasingly work, say, with, in the case of IT, with IT providers, to continually not only make their original teaching more industry relevant, but also to continue to keep that student up to date. So it's almost like you're renewing your yearly subscription of learning, if you like, or of teaching. We're not there yet, but I think those are some of the, particularly in fast-moving subject areas, that is the sort of ongoing way, is that you teach the basics in a block at the beginning, and then you're drip feeding content and learning throughout. So even on short, and I think rather than doing that at degree level, where it's probably easier to do is initially on sort of short courses. So if you're teaching a subject like cybersecurity, for example, you know that each year that industry is changing, and so how do you continue to offer top up of content to keep the learner's knowledge as up to date as possible. So it's that sort of move towards, so it's not just about modularization, but I think it's that move towards learning as a service, which I think will come in over the next 5-10 years. I think particularly in the UK model, I think if the student, maybe 20 or 30 years ago saw university as a set package, if you like, and a set thing, and you end up with a degree at the end, and then you go off and get a job. That's much harder with fees and those types of things now. It's much harder to justify that. So I think that linkage between, here is an amount of study and education, and here is a defined career path or indication of career path, is going to be far more important. So it's how do you make, the student's going to invest a lot of money to study and a lot of time, so they want to see some sort of defined award out of it. So it's not just saying, do this degree and you'll get a job in this market, but it's about how do you start linking employment opportunities to whilst they're studying, and how does it start feeding in. And equally at the same stage is how do you make the content more relevant, so that employers are saying, well, I'm not just hiring someone with a degree, but I'm hiring someone who's already got a basic qualification of a degree, but they've also got core skill education. They also know, I also feel fairly comfortable that they'll be quite effective within my organisation early on. So if you look at areas like apprenticeships and degree apprenticeships, it's really interesting because not only is the student studying, but at the same time they're studying, they're already gaining employment experience as well. So it's a neater, rather than being degree work, it's actually quite a neat meshing of the two. I think it's got to come from a credible source. So it's got to be, we won't, for example, and as I'm sure other universities won't, just put your name to any course. It has to be something that fits the pedagogical approach that we take, that we have defined the learning outcomes and those types of things. I think the other key piece is those badged online courses. In order for them to have a currency, to have value, you can't just get them easily. You have to show that you work towards it. You have to actually pass the online tests. It could be that you actually, a future model may be that you have to actually do a physical assessment as well. If you're doing those, that type of structure, then both the people undertaking the course and the people judging it for future employment know that somebody has worked towards a goal, and so there's a value to that badge. But I agree that it has to come from a recognised source, and it has to be not only, say coming from the OU, but it has to be endorsed by 50 employers, recognise that as being a quality course, as opposed to another badge which is from, somewhere that nobody's heard of. And I think, the value of organisations like Connect to Teach is very much building that linkage, not only in a formal way, but in an informal way as well, is how do you get much greater exchange of information, much greater exchange of ideas, and in that way we start getting courses that are more relevant to employment opportunities, but we equally see that employers understanding the value or the challenges around academia as well. So all organisations that are helping to bridge that gap are going to have benefit. I think there's going to be this view that people, but 2010, 12 years time, so I think there's going to be a view that people see education as a lifelong process. We've always talked about lifelong learning, but I think the reality of it is just because people's careers will continue to change and evolve, they will continue to have to go back and educate. There's a huge amount of information. How do you curate the right content and the right learning to that particular person's need at that particular time? So I think there's a lot of work to do there. But in terms of it, will there still be online learning? Yes, of course, because people are still going to move, they're still going to be independent, they're going to have less time to physically attend an institution, so they'll want to learn in the most convenient ways, and online will be that key element. Will people learn totally online? No, because despite technology, and I'm sure there's going to be huge advances in the next 10 years, is people still see immense value and gain immense value from face-to-face engagement as well. But I think that whole blended learning piece will become more sophisticated by 2030.